Moving the needle on founder failure, one conversation at a time. I'm your host, Lucas Poles, and welcome to Startup 2.0 by Spark XYZ. Join us each week as we give you access to some of the top investors and entrepreneurs around the country to help you think through and overcome some of the top challenges that startups face.
I think there's no better place in the country to be investing than Los Angeles.
What is the problem that you're solving and for who? Like, what is that specific pain point?
Sometimes when a company is not listening to its customers and just thinks it knows better than its customers, has a really, really hard time finding product market fit.
I want to see somebody that isn't going to stop. You know, this person, you just feel like they're gonna make it work.
Big heartfelt thank you to Brex, who without their support, this show would not be possible. We've seen firsthand the difficulties accessing basic corporate credit without providing a security deposit or personal guarantee early on. As companies grow, managing expenses has become more difficult and time consuming, which is why we've partnered with Brex to offer a corporate credit card that is not personally guaranteed, offers higher credit limits, provides auto reconciliation, and integrates with ERPs using receipt capture. Brex is the credit card of the startup ecosystem, and we highly encourage you to check them out.
All right, as people are filtering in, we will get started. The way this is going to go, we're very fortunate to have a bunch of great panelists here to talk about entrepreneurship in the university ecosystem and the different components of it. Very excited to have all of the panelists. I will give my introduction at the end, but I would love to have the panelists start out going left to right on giving a self-introduction on who they are. David, you are first on my screen, so I will let you kick it off.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I didn't know who was left on your screen. But I'm glad to be here. I'm David Choi. I'm a professor of entrepreneurship at Loyola Marymount University in Los Angeles. One of the things we brag about is that we're one of the first schools to have an entrepreneurship program in the US. And it's one of the top ranked programs in the country. It's interesting that our entrepreneurship major actually is one of the largest majors on campus. And we're now about to have a master's program in entrepreneurship focus on sustainability starting next year. We're planning for that. We've had tremendous success in developing entrepreneurial leaders, whether they go into startups or become employees of large companies. I think we've been developing some really entrepreneurial-minded individuals. I've been teaching for now, that's my 18th year, and it's been a lots of fun. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks, David. Richard, you're next on my screen.
Hi, so my name is Richard. I'm from Licensing and Ventures Manager in Oxford University Innovation. So my role is to identify, work with academics, researchers, students, and members of staff throughout the whole of the University of Oxford to identify, protect their IP, and then take it forward either through licensing to an existing company or helping them to set up and to then support a spin-out company from the University of Oxford.
Very
for context, I think last year we started 20 companies, raised something like 855 million in funding, and did about almost 900 deals.
Nice. That is hefty. Congrats on that. Steve, you are next on my screen.
Thanks, Lucas. Hi, everyone. Like Richard, I'm also from Oxford University Innovation. I sit on a different side of the fence, I guess, and I'm an investment manager looking after the university's equity interests in its spin-out portfolio. So we have about 150 active spin-outs, I guess, that have been formed over the last 20 or 30 years. As Richard said, we spin out 20 or so new ones every year. And we also manage a follow-on fund ourselves where we invest in some of our spin-outs. And my background's in venture investing in Australia and New Zealand before I joined Oxford a couple of years ago. I've also run entrepreneurial programs and a business incubator in the past as well. That's me.
Awesome. Thanks, Steve. Cyrus.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for having me. I'm Cyrus Johabi. I'm a professor and chair of the computer science department at USC, University of Southern California in Los Angeles. As far as entrepreneurship experience, I was a co-founder of two startups, one acquired in 2012, another one in 2019. I've also been on various, as an advisory member or scientific advisory member on various startups. And I made the mistake of investing once in one of my student startups. I'm kidding, of course. That was a great experience. And as far as my research background, my main area is data science and AI, and in particular, my expertise is in geospatial and location data analysis.
Awesome, thank you, Cyrus. Andrea.
Hello, everyone. My name is Andrea Lipton, and I work with Harvard Business Publishing's corporate learning. And so just to position us in the ecosystem, we are the nonprofit subsidiary of the business school. And so you probably know us best because we're the publishers of the Harvard Business Review. And the part of the world that I sit in will bring a distinctly different perspective than my fellow panelists, because in corporate learning, we're looking at how do we actually work with corporations around the globe to develop their leaders. And so we're focused a lot on how to drive innovation and entrepreneurship within organizations. And I've been with Harvard Business Publishing for about 1.5 years, though I was on the client side in my years working in talent development and leadership development in organizations. And I've also had the opportunity to personally coach, because I'm also an executive coach outside of my work with Harvard Business Publishing, a number of early stage startup founders. So really excited to be here with everyone today.
Awesome. Big thank you to our panelists. Another big thank you to Moonshot House, who actually put this entirely together. They're the community arm of Create New Ventures. It's a global virtual network for investors, leaders, creative minds. In the last 2 months, they've already brought on 250 executives into the exclusive network. Doing very well, and look forward to doing more of these events with them. My name is Lucas Poles. My background, what I currently do now, I do early stage investing in B2B SaaS companies under Amplify Capital. I also run Spark, which is a platform management software for incubators and accelerators. And previously, before this, I actually used to run an accelerator here in LA. Additionally, I was fortunate enough to work with Noam Wasserman on a case study about hybrid entrepreneurship. And so I'm quite familiar with some of the academic side, though absolutely not as much as in-depth as everyone here, as well as the investing side from an entrepreneurship standpoint by sitting on both sides of the table. And so, yeah, we're going to kick it off. And one of the best places to kick it off is maybe a little venting. So let's talk about some of the challenges that your respective programs are currently facing, whether it's COVID, whether it's coming together between the different disciplines. Who would like to kick it off? I see David unmuted, so I'm going to call on you.
I was just getting prepared, but I'm a bad complainer. But I think if you look at entrepreneurship faculty members, we do teaching, research, like any other faculty member, and then we have to do mentoring, advising companies, and so on. So when additional curricular programs, develop new programs, we do all kinds of things. So I guess that's my venting. But in terms of day to day, I think this online teaching has made probably the teaching a little bit more difficult. I mean, we tell our students we keep them at the same level of standard we always demand of them, and but I think some of the experiential components of teaching has become harder. There's less natural, casual learning from each other, right? So those are my the most obvious day-to-day struggles.
Well, I think I can go next. And first thing is that you should never ask a chair of a department to vent, because that's going to take like 2 hours. So I'm going to spare you and not vent on that aspect. But I guess I'll maybe mention a little bit of a short-term challenge I see specifically with entrepreneurship, or at least my observation at USC. We had a number of programs at USC to help with entrepreneurship for students, including competitions and having, for example, competitions that included actually workshops, for example, for the students to learn about the business side of the thing, if they're coming from computer science or engineering, learn, for example, how to do business, how to put together a business plan, how to do customer analysis, and so on, and then also pair them with entrepreneurs and folks from industry to help as mentors. One challenge I see with the COVID and everything being on Zoom, I don't see these to be, some of them were canceled, and some of them I don't see them as successful as before. And this is, I would say, not unexpected, because as you all know, one of the major aspects of entrepreneurship and putting together a startup is actually the whole networking and being able to talk to people. And the Zoom and online kind of doesn't make it the most efficient. And a lot of people, including myself, are kind of zoomed out. So when we're asked to attend various panels or talks, usually the first response is that, no, sorry, I'm too busy. So it's even more difficult to find mentors to help with the students and so on. So that's more of a short-term, or hopefully short-term, or the current challenge. A more kind of a broader challenge in general in academia, for as far as entrepreneurship goes, is the issue of IP, and the fact that every time we have new ideas, either us or the students, this process of going through the intellectual property protection and so on through the university in order to get to the point that we can basically start a company. And that has been always kind of delaying things. And I think one, at least in computer science, I see one backdoor is basically doing most of our work and make it open source. And then once you get to the companies, they can basically use the open source code the same as anybody else who can do it. But of course, the folks who developed the code originally has better understanding of how to utilize the code and how to expand it. So that's, I guess, another aspect of the challenges.
Totally understandable. Andrea, please.
I'll go next. You know, and take us a different direction of, you know, what I worry about right now is the relationship between the economic pressure that the COVID and the pandemic has created globally on universities, and what this will ultimately mean for all of our programs, but especially those around entrepreneurship, because there's inherent risk in it, right? Our entrepreneurs are taking us to green pastures, to new fields, blue water, right? All of the models that we've all read and talked about there. And so at times like this, where we're looking and asking questions like, what's going to happen to our endowments? Will, you know, not having students on campus is impacting our revenue. So how do we think about that? What will we choose to continue to fund? And then the logistics of actually how to run those programs in ways that are safe for all the participants, and, you know, leverage technology to find different ways to create that incidental learning, those moments of inspiration that happen when I drop a pencil and bend down to pick it up in the hallway of the office and look up and see something I've never seen before. And how do we factor all of those things in and make choices that aren't, you know, maybe as safe as we'd like them to be and predictable as we'd like them to be in highly uncertain times.
Definitely interesting. A couple of questions have stemmed out of that, just coming to my head, but I'll let Richard and Steve jump on, and maybe you want to address a little bit about what Cyrus talked about, especially because you guys work in the technology transfer space, albeit at a different university. And for anyone that doesn't understand what technology transfer is that universities end up, the academics end up creating IP specifically within the university, and for universities to be able to tap into that, they have a technology transfer office where they basically send the IP to then help either build teams or get it licensed out with other companies, though you two will probably be able to explain it better than I can.
Yeah, so we do as Lucas just said. In my experience, if we have a new disclosure which is patent related, for example, generally speaking, from first disclosure to filing, it can be done in maybe 2 to 3 weeks. So I don't think that's necessarily a huge barrier in terms of timelines, particularly since that could be run in parallel with peer review process for publications, for example, which will usually take months, not weeks. For software, it's substantially less time than that. I mean, in my experience, the delay is usually getting information together from the academic in terms of what have you created, what are the third-party dependencies, are there any reach-through claims from third-party dependencies, is something you're taking forward. It doesn't take that long. The hard part is actually in terms of working out, well, given what you've got or where we are, what do you actually want to do with it going forward? And that's where the challenges come in, if you're limited to working in Teams or Zoom, and that you don't get that opportunity to have those in-person meetings. And a platform such as this, for example, is great if you're having this kind of event where only one person's talking at a time. But if you're in a room trying to troubleshoot what is it you want to do, what is success, how should we take this forward, and trying to really drill down to what the value proposition is, it's very difficult to do that in a platform such as this, because you can't have those fortuitous parallel conversations taking place where you can have one person's comment triggering a useful or another contribution from another person, then takes a conversation a route that everybody's then happy with. You just can't do. You can't replicate that on an existing platform.
Steve, anything to add?
Yeah, I think I support what Richard says. I think as a tech transfer office, we're kind of used to being in the middle, which means that everyone's got a reason to hate us. The university, we bring the filthy commercialization world into an academic environment. Academics don't like us because we slow them down, stop them doing the right things that they want to do. And investors don't like us because we're just an obstacle between them and the IP. So we're kind of used to sitting in the middle there and being kicked around by everyone. But having said that, it's a fascinating place to be. And we've certainly seen a lot more activity over the last few months in this COVID world. Not a lot more, but significantly more than we saw pre. So we didn't expect that to happen. So our challenge is just been, traditionally in Oxford, it's been a very constrained environment through things like real estate, strangely enough. And now that constraint has kind of short-term disappeared because everything happens on Zoom, and we don't need to have physical spaces for teams as often. But I guess longer term, our real challenge is one of scaling up. We think we have a very good early stage pipeline. So Oxford is a really strong university research-wise across the board. So we have a lot of IP inventions happening, 400 or 500 every year, as Richard said. We have a very good process of spinning those out into spin-outs. We have some very engaged and committed seed Series A investors around us locally, and we have strong connections into global network. But what we somehow lack is that kind of expansion into the very big companies from the small ones that we're good at starting. So that's really how do we scale up what we do and extend our capabilities further down the value chain, if you like. Everyone talks about unicorns. We've got probably 1 or 2 in Oxford. We love an order of magnitude more. How do we start to build those really big companies around our ecosystem?
Awesome, thank you. Just going off that point, like, what is your more typical model within the tech transfer office? Do you have more of a venture studio where you guys are actually putting the team together to create the actual startup, or do you focus more on licensing to others and then doing fundraising on that standpoint?
We often find ourselves taking the lead from the founders themselves. So we have some founders, for example, who are sufficiently well connected and prior experience of doing companies, or they've come from industry, have moved to university, and what they want is some, basically going down the, do you have some connections to help us to maybe find some additional investors, or maybe massaging slightly the pitch, and then maybe giving some additional reassurance or details around what is university process, how do we get through university process. Whereas we have others who will come to us with an idea, they think it makes sense, but simply have no idea what else to do, at which point we will then do everything up to a point the company spun out. whatever's needed to help them to get to that stage. We can also, in fact, we often do have people sitting on the boards of those companies for say 1 or 2 years afterwards to make sure their support after they spun out as well. So we don't just support up to a point a license deal has been done. We will then actively support that company afterwards.
Awesome, cool. I want to jump back to something Cyrus had touched on, which is the inability to have different types of co-founders connecting. So from his perspective, because he runs the Turvy, which is the engineering school, looking for business students to bring into their ventures, it gets around towards the idea that, especially at universities, students or university students end up creating very homogeneous teams just because of how disciplined or how siloed the different disciplines specifically are, and that it's very difficult for them to jump back and forth. And so I wanted to discuss maybe this challenge, especially as we look at COVID right now, because I mean, you're right, we're stuck on Zoom. It's very difficult to try to break down those barriers, and maybe what are the solutions now and then even after when we have a vaccine and we try to get back to a little bit closer to normal.
Well, I think in Oxford, for Oxford, a variety of different ways in which Oxford specifically tries to break down barriers between different subject areas. So, for example, the university is and has been for several hundred years a collegiate university. So you don't apply to do apply to do a degree in a particular subject, and you then obviously go through a degree program which is dedicated to that subject. But you're also a part of a college, and a college will include students that span all subjects across the entirety of the university. So you then have a specialization academically, but you also have that broad network of individuals from across the university from a variety of different subject areas through the collegiate-based system. At graduate level, you also find that you've got degree programs and DPhil programs or PhD programs, where again, you've got doctoral training centers or centers of doctoral training that are groups of themed subjects, but those individuals who are on those subjects are going through a variety of different university departments. We also have a biomedical research centers, which are specifically designed to force scientists, engineers, mathematicians, and clinicians to work together on multidisciplinary projects. There are also a number of funding schemes which are provided by the UK government and other sources in the UK that are specifically dedicated toward multidisciplinary teams. So this then means that at multiple levels within the academic setup within our environment, individuals are being forced, where possible, to work across different teams to break down those silos. Clearly doesn't always happen. You do often have people who are working on a subject with someone else who's an expert in that subject, and they'll just focus on that particular subject area. It doesn't always necessarily lead to a multidisciplinary team, but there are multiple instances of that taking place. There also often find you have networking events. I mean, in Oxford, we have something else called a Foundry, which is specifically dedicated or is actually set up by the business school. So the SIA Business School, and it's specifically focused at undergraduate students. And this is where students who wish to be entrepreneurs or entrepreneurially inclined can go there, can network, can meet people who are similar mindset, but from across the entirety of the university. And they are being supported going through an accelerator program to start new companies.
I can also maybe comment on that. So we have very similar programs that Richard mentioned, but two kind of organic way that I see students get together, and at least in my case, students from computer science and on a business school, because USC does have actually a very good business school as well, is that there are actually two ways. One is that we have these degree programs, like for example, our undergrad, we have one undergrad degree called CSBA, which is Computer Science Business Administration. And this is basically computer science students taking courses from business school. And that's where they start becoming friends with business school students in their class. Or business school students who take a minor in computer science, for example, and take computer science courses. So that's one organic way that unfortunately, again, because of everything being online, it's less of an opportunity for students to meet in a class and become friends. So that I can see that as obstacle. And the other organic way was basically students living in student housings and dormitories, and then they organically come together. I mean, and they become friends, and you suddenly see somebody from business school and somebody from art and somebody from computer science end up to be friends, and they basically put their mind together and come up with an idea that has all the aspects. And again, unfortunately, because of everything being online, that opportunity is now also somehow hindered. So I mean, the programs, as Richard said, we try to put them together and try to bring people together because of competitions or various things. But the more organic, natural way of students coming together from different disciplines, unfortunately, it's definitely slowed down because of the current situation.
Sorry, are US students at home, or are they actually on campus?
Some of them, but not, I mean, at least in the case of USC, some of them still try to go and live around campus. I mean, student housing is not available, so they cannot live inside dormitories inside campus, but they can, for example, by themselves decide to live around campus, and we have some of that, but they're definitely not going to classes on campus.
Okay, because that's different to the UK.
If I may add, so there are a few things. Sorry, Andrea. There are a few things we do. Cyrus mentioned, because of COVID, it's very difficult to meet. So we've used a couple different online community programs where you can list what project you're working on, your teammates are, what kind of skills you might need. Okay, and then other people can list their strengths and their skill sets. So we have we used one platform, we just changed, and so we're trying to populate that and get that going. We have specific co-curricular programs like Startup Weekend, which brings in students from all different majors on one weekend, 50 some hours to work together. And then some of the few other things we did was, like in our computer science program, I think the intro class is open to every major. So people can try it out, and maybe they don't like it, but they get to know some computer science folks. And then same with entrepreneurship, we try to open it up as long as we have space for any major. The students can come in, take a class, and get to know the basics with the intention that they'll collaborate. In the future, it doesn't always work, so we try whatever we can to increase that activity.
Andrea.
Where I was going to jump in is to highlight that for years on our campuses, we've been using these interdisciplinary, like still staying in our silos, but saying, just like in organizations, you can reach over there and we'll do these interdisciplinary things. And so, might this pandemic be, might the silver lining of the pandemic show us that, frankly, the disciplines have broken down in the real world, but they haven't in our institutions, right? So we've been behind. There's the E-Quad. My father was a computer science professor, right? There was that building. And he never knew any of the professors in other buildings. And I remember noting this when I was getting a campus tour from him. And he's like, I have no idea what that building is. And he'd been there for 15 years. And so, I invite us, especially because we're talking about how this impacts entrepreneurs. How do we take this moment and the shortcomings that we're seeing of the way that our institutions work in general and ask ourselves, how do we lean into these entrepreneurial communities that we're already involved with and help rethink both for this moment and for the future? Because now we're also looking forward and saying, in 5, 10, 15 years, our institutions are going to be flooded with students who spent a very formative year of their lives learning virtually together. Some of them will have had great experiences. Other of them will have very poor experiences, and what does this moment mean for us? It really could be a tremendous turning point, or it could be something that we tolerate and then go back to what we've always done. And it'll be interesting to see which of our organizations chooses kind of the blue pill or the red pill.
My interaction with, institutions in higher education, if I've worked at I've interacted with a few different ones, but, Andrea, you're very optimistic and, energetic. You tell the administration hey, our bureaucracy is a little too much. It's not good to have so much bureaucracy. They don't know what you're talking about. They never learned that bureaucracy was bad. They think, what's wrong with good rules, good formalities. That's how, you do things right, right? Whereas in business, we know the less the bureaucracy, it's actually more efficient and more, innovative. That concept never resonated. They never got that in the top in the university administration.
So is that a conversation that is actually happening at the universities right now? Like, because we are forced to re-examine not just the value that universities are actually bringing students, because they don't have the ability to get on campus and go network and do the main value of going to university. Because I mean, in essence, half the things you learn at university you can learn on YouTube. At this point, I feel like a lot of people are unfortunately learning that. And so are the universities actually going through and rethinking, like, hey, this is maybe a time to reset, or are they so entrenched in their ways that they're like, nope, we're gonna white knuckle this until we get out, and then everything will be fine after that?
I can chip in there, Lucas. I think it's quite easy to characterize universities as reasonably bureaucratic institutions, and I think they are in many ways. But the flip side of that is that they've been around a very long time. Sort of joke at Oxford that we dusted off our protocols for COVID from the bubonic plague in the 17th century. We've kind of been through pandemics before. And in all seriousness, the universities have been around. They're not going anywhere. They're very long-term institutions that have adapted over time. And I think you're seeing an enormous effort across all universities to adapt to this new world. Quite what that means, I think, is a little bit too early to say long term. But I think coming out of it, there will be universities that capitalize well on that, others that perhaps don't, and that's going to be a source of competitive advantage, if you like, in the education market. But certainly there's awful lot of things being tried and tested, and time will tell which of those stick.
I have actually rather opposite view, Lucas, than you're having, that they can learn everything from YouTube. So one kind of observation, or at least let me start by this. So one decision USC made in the past, before the COVID, I don't know if you guys know, but USC has a very good distance education network, or what they called then. It goes back to many years ago, and it basically has these studios where we prepare the classes and so on, and various ranking for the past several years always been number one, at least in computer science. That said, there was a intentional decision of not offering then courses for our undergrad students. So this distance education was only for graduate students. And that exactly was because we thought that the undergrad students need to have the experience of actually being on campus, and the experience of learning and working with other students, being actually a lot of the endowment in the past several years at USC was spent on building residential housing inside campus for the students, to the point that for the first time a couple of years ago, all our freshmen were getting inside the campus housing, using the endowment that basically built a whole village on the north of campus. And I think that was very successful, and this was actually a good decision. Now, interestingly, what this COVID taught us was that putting everybody on Zoom, which we ended up doing for our undergrad, and we said, oh, okay, so I mean, graduate students were doing that. Let's do that for undergrad. It's probably not going to be a big difference. It's been a big difference. I mean, I told you at the beginning, you should not get me started venting as a department chair, but that's the problem. I mean, I'm getting complaints from students, undergrad students, especially freshmen. You think computer science should be the easiest material to teach online, right? Because it is basically all coding and so on. However, they are really suffering. I mean, it seems that it becomes more difficult not having that in-person collaborative work on homework assignments and going to your friend next door asking questions and so on. All that is missing. And then this one-on-one and in-person interaction with the faculty during office hours and so on. So I think, in a sense, actually, the COVID experience showed, and they really all want to go back. They really want to come back to campus. So this COVID, if anything, actually showed the opposite, that it seems that the university actually did have something that they were offering by creating this environment that the students can experience.
You know, Cyrus, I would love to jump on what you shared because absolutely, you know, there's a presumption that content about technology is better delivered over technology than content over things like soft skills, leadership development, communication skills. And that's a question mark for me, especially given my background. But I think that one of the things that we're seeing, which really comes back to how do we enable, one of the questions that we received before this around how do we enable professors and university staff who have not been entrepreneurs themselves to really be accelerators of our entrepreneur community, right? Are we setting our professors up, some of you all up, to be successful? Because right now, whether it's in grade school, my sister, you know, is an educator. I have so many educators in my family and community, and so many of them said, nobody ever gave me even the beginning of a class. I got maybe Zoom basics of like how to use a room after a waiting room after people started getting Zoom bombed, and how to show my students how to raise their hands. And so I wonder, is this kind of a microcosm of some of that bigger tension that we've seen in our institutions around what we actually need ourselves so that we can be the best, agents of change for our entrepreneurial communities. I'm curious what the rest of you think. And sorry, Lucas, I realized I just suddenly wrestled asking questions away from you without your permission.
Oh, please. This is what we love. Love inciting stuff and deep thought. So yeah, please.
Cyrus, did you all have like a crash course for professors who suddenly were going on Zoom? I'm curious what happened to.
Yeah, I didn't want to just monopolize the panel and I keep talking, but sure, since you asked, yes, we do. I mean, there are many training courses, all the way from the mechanics of using Zoom and so on. Also, our ITS, information technology services, they provided a lot of default kind of links for everybody. So if I'm teaching a course, we use Blackboard, for example, it automatically creates a Zoom link for my course. It automatically recorded. The default is password protected. So basically, if with minimum effort, my course is set up. So I don't think that's, at least I don't feel that's an issue in our side. And then we also have centers for excellent teaching that they're all now providing all sorts of hints and experiences on teaching on Zoom, and most importantly, taking exam on Zoom. I mean, that's one of the main challenges. So that we, how to proctor exams online, how various approaches to exams and so on. So, I mean, that's a separate, I would say, set of challenges to deal with the mechanics and what's the effective way of that. But my point was that besides that, this in person and having the other students around you so that they can help you. I think that's what's missing, that personal touch, the experience, even for technology topics as close to the online system that we're using, like computer science, they still need that extra personal communication, and that's the experience that the universities or the value add that the universities provide.
I agree with everything Cyrus said about the importance of coming back and stuff like that. What I found interesting, Andrea, is at my school we talked about offering education online years after years. And we never could get to it. And then when COVID hit, within a matter of a couple of weeks, everybody, changed their behavior, and we crash learned. And I think most of us are offering pretty good or awesome classes. But I think going forward, I think we're actually going to utilize this technology and the skill we learned, right? So I think we'll probably have a little bit more online classes, even though when most of our classes are going to be in person, we'll probably mix it up with some online sessions as well, going forward. So we'll try to use the best of both in the future.
Awesome. Thanks for that, guys. So I want to get Richard and Steve involved a little bit. And I want to go back to the point that they had made earlier about kind of taking that next step with their ecosystems respectively. So how do you get more towards more unicorns? And so I want to talk a little bit about that, and then finding out like what maybe are some of the steps that you are taking, maybe what's on your wish list of things that you think should be taken in the future, especially as technology transfer is it's in very early stages for a lot of universities going forward, and really tapping that power.
Yeah, I think that's a long-term game, essentially. I mean, Oxford's first spin out was in 1959, and this year we did our 200 or something. So it takes a long time, and we've done probably more in the last 3 years than we did in the previous 47 or whatever it is. So it's a very long-term game, and I think the secret for Oxford has been to see this less as a transactional process of taking a piece of intellectual property and moving it through the commercialization process to an endpoint, maybe a license deal or something like that, and saying that if you want to make an impact on the world with this piece of knowledge, this invention, then we have to think about all the different players that need to be involved in that and bring all of those parties to what we're now calling an ecosystem. So it's the saying that it takes a village to raise a child. You need for successful businesses, you need the research, you need the talent, you need the investors, the capital, the physical infrastructure, the place, the connections, the networks, and all of those things need to come together. So universities stand a very good chance of being at the center of those sort of ecosystems to help those other things coalesce around them to create something which is a fantastic environment in which to grow a business. So for us, it's been about attracting investors into Oxford, attracting talent into Oxford, and having it being seen as a fantastic place to grow a business. And we've been very successful. Oxford has one of the biggest, or the world's biggest, university venturing fund in town, which has been a fantastic catalyst for creating ventures. But we want to go beyond that, bring more talent in, bring teams in as well who've been through the process of creating a business, going back in, doing it again, recycling their talent, their capital, their expertise. So long-term game, but it can be achieved over time. And I think just one of the triggers that's actually quite interesting for us at the moment is that we're starting now to recycle cash back to the university from exits that have occurred within our spin-out portfolio. And that's a very powerful signal back to the university that this is something that not only creates impact in the world, but can actually be profitable as well. And that funding that goes back can be reinvested in more strategic areas of research to accelerate the flywheel, if you like, and create more. So small steps, and they all have to come together, and then eventually the momentum starts to be built.
Yeah, so I think in a UK context, for example, the big push for doing tech transfer and related activities came from a shift in government policy that suggested that your academic institutions will be assessed based on the impact of their research, with impact being one of those metrics being company started or license deals done, some measurable, relatively straightforward KPI demonstrating the research was having an impact on society at large. That is then led down to research funders tying, well, how is your project going to deliver impact? That's then caused a change in attitude, change of thinking. You've got, as Steve's alluded to, building a local ecosystem, building a framework. You then have a younger population of new research groups, leaders wanting to come in. They've come into an environment where impact is a clear measure and they want to establish a career. And that is then fostering a need to take entrepreneurship seriously, taking the fact that your research needs to do something positive. beyond research publications is something that could be seen as a positive. That, as well as, for example, having, as Steve alluded to, past success stories leading to more money going into departments, which is then having a positive impact on the department in terms of more research being funded or a change in facilities and improvement of facilities, which again has a multiplicative gain. That's all changing, leading to a change of mindset, which is why we're getting more of the seed stage companies coming out, as well as an increased availability of investors or investment funds at seed and Series A stage. But what we're lacking, as Steve's already said, again, is that growth investment fund capital. So that growth stage capital, we can take it from Series A up to much larger stage companies. And for those investors being willing to wait for that company to become those big unicorn companies that the UK as a whole would like to have, and then to have those management teams coming across, or those key individuals with that prior experience of running those kinds of companies, wanting to start to working with these university spin-out companies from Oxford to then have them grow.
Awesome. I feel like one of the key drivers that was kind of hyped on was the start of the flywheel, and that getting capital back from an exited company really probably shifts a lot of the mentalities of the people within the university, because you're seen as a revenue generator rather than a detractor.
Yeah, although I think tech transfer as a function will largely be loss leading, because for most academic institutions, for a majority of the time, I think it's difficult to say that tech transfer is going to be a net positive because of the costs in terms of getting stuff out, because you're always going to have a funnel. But there is a key driver in terms of having that money going back into the universities. It's a clear driver there saying, look, we're not doing this so that others can profit. We're doing this so that all stakeholders can drive a benefit.
Is it something that could be possible to not be just a loss leader, and that you actually could turn it into a profit-making machine for the actual university going forward? Is that even something that's considered in the model, or is it even possible?
I think for a majority of academic institutions, it's seen as we want to do something where we can be seen to be having impact, because as an institution, we want to have a positive impact, but it isn't that function isn't necessarily in itself going to produce a profit. I think in Oxford context, it's not unreasonable to believe that we will end up being self-sustainable as a consequence of the funds we're generating. So we can cover our own costs, and then anything we make beyond that to then be returned to university. But if you can compare the amounts of money we're generating versus the amount of research income comes into university each year, or its endowment, we're probably just going to be a rounding error. I mean, we're competing against an academic institution that's been around for almost 1,000 years.
Yeah, it's absolutely true. So thank you for that. Anyone else? Thoughts? Moving on. Cool. So let's briefly talk about this idea that, and you probably see it more in the venture community rather than at the actual universities, but the conflict between the idea that entrepreneurship cannot be taught; it must more be learned by actually doing. And so, I want to kind of gather your thoughts around what the benefits are of teaching entrepreneurship kind of in the universities, and what type of impact that actually has on their specific ventures that they're trying to start at the university. Because a lot of the time you end up having to, you might be crushed by the idea that they have to learn continuously, right? Rather than their venture just failing and moving on and starting a new one. So let's talk through a little bit about the idea of can entrepreneurship be taught?
Okay, I'll start with that because that's my bread and butter. So, if you look at certain studies, actually they say, and they looked at different universities, that the effect of entrepreneurship education didn't have a lot of positive effect on the success of entrepreneurs or startups. But I think it depends on the school, it depends on the program, it depends what they teach. So I think it's probably true that you can't teach entrepreneurship in the traditional way. You teach literature or some other subject. But I think most education does have to be experiential, right? Although, there are things that could be taught the traditional way as well. So if you think about what entrepreneurs need to do a startup and be successful, in addition to great technology that might come out of the technology transfer office, they probably need certain business basics, right? They need probably entrepreneurship basics, like lean startup, which I'm sure, Lucas, you emphasize on. And then they need what people might call entrepreneurial mindset. So, this opportunity orientation and resilience, all that kind of stuff, right? And so if you just teach one aspect of it, just teach business, or just teach entrepreneurial mindset, the entrepreneur is not going to be properly prepared. But if you teach this in a more systematic way and do it mostly in an experiential way, some don't have to be all experiential, I think there's a good chance that this person is going to be pretty well equipped. So I actually think pretty positively about the effect of the right entrepreneurship education contributing to the success of startups.
I would just say, I completely agree. As a person who's dedicated her life to professional development and asking these questions, it's really about unbundling the set of skills, capabilities, awarenesses that an entrepreneur needs. And then I think also asking, and I'm asking this as a genuine question, does an individual entrepreneur, because we talk about it as like a proper noun, like it's a person, as opposed to, I had the fortune of working with one CEO who once drew a circle of his C-suite. And he looked at me and he said, Andrea, we are a complete whole together. And then he proceeded to explain to me how none of his hires were exactly the best fit for their title in a traditional way, because they integrated in a jigsaw way that all of them collectively brought this together, right? And this is one of the issues of how many founders do you have and things like that. But I'm curious, are you thinking about, like, I as a single entrepreneur, capital E, need to have the totality of it, or I need to value the totality of it, be clear about what subset I bring, and then know what complements I should be seeking in my founder community or in my investor community or in the rest of the world that I surround myself with to be successful?
If I can just address your question. So again, I totally agree with what you said. If you unbundled all the skills that might make an entrepreneur successful, and if she or she knows you don't have certain skill set, right, or certain competencies, you can complement that with a co-founder or team member or team members, right? Thereby have all the skill sets or competencies needed. So I agree with what you just said.
Awesome. Thank you for that. Before we get...
Lucas, I just quickly want to make the observation. About 25 years ago, we were having this exact conversation about, could leadership be taught? And so I feel like this is periodically we have this conversation and go, wow, there are these people who seem to be really good at this thing that seems like we should all be really good at. Were they born that way? Right. And then there's the evolution of the conversation about what really goes into that. So I personally find this really exciting, because imagine where we could be, hopefully not that long from now, but a few years from now, if that conversation matures in the same way some of the conversations about things like leadership development have transformed over the last, certainly in the time that I've been in that space.
It is interesting that maybe the smartest guy in business, Peter Drucker, said for a long time that entrepreneurship could be taught like any other discipline. He said that for many decades. And, after learning all these different techniques that I, go to a conference to learn, my predecessor in my program, I think he had the best technique for probably encouraging, people to pursue startups or develop the courage to do something. And what he did was he just told his students, I believe in you, right? And that ended up being more powerful than any technique, right? Any education method we ever used. Okay, and he created probably more entrepreneurs than most people, developed more of them, taught more of them, using all sort of fancy techniques in entrepreneurship.
Awesome. So we've got a couple questions in the last couple minutes that we're going to jump to. how do regulations tie school hands in terms of nonprofit versus profitable approaches to entrepreneurship, and what regulations are you aware of that should change in order to have better support for student entrepreneurs? Anyone can take that.
So actually, I was looking at the Q&As, and there was another question about the why don't school invest in startups, basically, student startup, which I think is kind of tied to this other question that you brought up. I don't know exactly the regulations and laws, and probably I shouldn't have said anything, but since nobody talked, I do know that our school at some point was looking into investing in startups, because as I said, we have a number of competitions and so on, and sometimes the school provides space, sometimes the seed money and so on. So potentially they could have used that as an investment and get some percentage of the company, which would help later on as a revenue model back to the university from these startups. But I know some regulation or some law for this profit versus nonprofit is not kind of making that happening now. I know they're looking into it. I don't know the status, but there seems to be a little bit of a challenge for the schools to actually invest in startups that their students
So I'll push back a little bit on that. So Greif actually has an evergreen fund. So they took it as donations, I think, into the actual fund. And if there are any exits, it gets sent straight back to the fund as not just an educational piece, but another way to be able to support entrepreneurs at USC. So it has to have a specific co-founder from USC to be considered, and they'll put in nominal amounts. They set up different regulations on the idea around they're not going to be leading rounds. It's not going to be they're not going to put a substantial portion in for the round. It's very much follow on in smaller amounts to help support the ecosystem.
So the investor would be the endowment, or the investor would be the university?
That's a good question.
Because that's the part. So if there is a separate endowment that can be used for investment, that's for sure.
I don't think it's a specific endowment. I think it's technically under the Greif Center for what they're actually doing.
So they become an investor in the
I think so.
technology.
I could absolutely be wrong. I'm not on the inner workings of it.
Yeah, so I don't know either. So I think that I know that people looking into it as a possible way of revenue, but it hasn't been straightforward. Let's just put it that way. Otherwise, it would have been done by now.
I'll just point to Harvard Business Publishing is a example of this, right? Actually, as a nonprofit that's owned by the university. They started as in 1994. And so there are models out there for how universities can consider having kind of spin-offs that are working, right? So if you've bought an HBR, which I'm guessing many of you within the sound of my voice have, right? You have fed into exactly this kind of system. And so I'm certainly not a lawyer who can answer about the regulations piece. There are effective models. We're an example of it. And I saw Ali's question about impediments. And rather than answering from the impediments, I apologize for answering not exactly the question you're asking, but I wonder, could we be thinking differently about the levers that we already do have? So, how might we use things like financial aid to think about driving entrepreneurship in our institutions? And I know that each of them has very different relationships with this, right? And in the United States, the Ivy Leagues and other schools have different, and state schools have different relationships with this. But I think there are ways that we could be more supportive. But again, going back to something we talked about earlier, that there tend to be, these buildings, and they're visual versions of our silos. How might we start to cross campus a little more to think about that differently going forward?
Awesome.
I saw that last question also. I just quickly, so just to clarify, so there is the universities, if the IP started at the university and then the IP is transferred to a startup, then as part of the negotiation with the startup, the university can get shares in the company. And then if that company suddenly become Google, then of course there's a revenue. So I think that's an already established process. The alternative process is for not the IP that is developed at the university, but just the students at the university do a startup, and then university support with some other, either with funding or space, and then get shares in the company. That's the one that is not straightforward, at least.
Yeah, and a lot of universities have problems, just like Cyrus mentioned. Their lawyers telling them it's not possible, whatever. But then we look at certain universities, they do have these funds. So it's probably possible. We just need some better lawyers.
I know we're at time, Lucas, but I recognize that I think it's Eliane Rodriguez. And if I said your first name wrong, please coach me when we meet in person someday, and I apologize. But this question of digital divide within student populations, I just wanted to speak into this and say that I think this is really exacerbating an issue that already exists in the entrepreneurial and venture capital world, which is it is systematically disadvantages women and other underrepresented groups, that they tend to have less access, less network, less connection. And so I think that right now is a really risky moment for us, especially at a time when there's so much focus globally on these issues of equity. So while I can't answer the specifics of your question about the experience specifically, we know that it's real, and that it's, that the groups that already were at a disadvantage, it's disadvantaging them even more. And that's something that we can all lean into to close some of that gap, I think.
So that was actually going to be our last question. So I'll put it to the group. So how has the experience been with the digital divide for maybe the underrepresented groups within the university?
Yeah, I'm the reason I'm trying to be quiet, I need to catch another meeting at 2. So I think that I can live. If I start this, that's going to take a while.
All good. Well, then we'll shut it down to be respectful to our panelists. Thank you so much for jumping on. Really appreciate the time. Thank you, especially to everyone in the UK for taking this meeting at like 9 or 10 at night. So thank you again. Look forward to chatting with everyone again soon. Have a great day.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank
Nice
you all.
meeting you all.
Okay,
Bye.
bye.